I thought I'd like to start our discussion of the book, The Boys in the Boat, with a quote from George Pocock, who was in fact the master builder for not only the University of Washington, but also really the whole world eventually, but certainly all of this country. He was just absolutely marvelous at building shells, which was a great craft and art. And these were his comments about rowing. Rowing is hard work, not much glory. There's a beauty which ordinary men can't see, but extraordinary men do. Rowing a race is an art, not a frantic scramble. Head power as well as hand power, with all thoughts positive. The swing, that's the fourth dimension of rowing, where the run is uncanny. The work of propelling the shell becomes a pleasure. Losing yourself entirely in the cooperative effort of the crew as a whole. It's a great art, is rowing, a symphony of action and motion. And when you're rowing well, why, it's nearing perfection. And when you near perfection, you're touching the divine. And so this book, The Boys of the Boat, can I ask maybe before we start talking, or I start talking initially, how many of you have read the book or seen the movie? So probably, definitely a majority of us. So I will not spend a lot of time, but I do want to make sure we all have a sense of what the plot is. After that, I have some comments or thoughts about the book and also the movie. And then I hope to get a lot of you to join in. Certainly I know Dodie, whose dad rowed in crew not far removed from the time of this story. Okay, so briefly, this book tells the story of the 1936 Olympics and the crew from the University of Washington that ends up winning the gold. But it starts back as the book unfolds in 1914, when Joe Rantz, R-A-N-T-Z, the primary hero of our story, is born in Tacoma, Washington. And the book will actually follow the individuals, all 8 of the rowers and the cocks, over the following 20 years between when they were born and when the Olympics happens. We're following Joe, and Joe did not have an easy childhood. He was born at the age of 4. His mom died of cancer. Less than a year later, he got scarlet fever. And because his father was so upset by his mother's death, he had sort of left and went off to Canada by himself, leaving Joe and his older brother. Joe was sent off to a relative in Pennsylvania, where he was in bed for something like 9 months with the disease, then returns to Washington, as does the father from Canada. But the father immediately marries another wife, Fula, who was also a musician, and they start to have another family. At the age of 11, Joe is abandoned because Thula finds him, being a active guy of that age, irritating relative to her babies, because they're just brand new. And so his father, Harry, takes his wife and they go off to Seattle. And, Joe is left in this little town of Sequin, Washington. He has a house, but he doesn't have any food or money, and he has to figure out what to do. He learns how to get salmon, fish for salmon during the right part of the year. He finds out that he can bootleg liquor. Being so young, he finds a way of doing it. And he even goes to school every day, and in fact, he's top of his class. He does great. So he survives, and there's even a picture of him at a little older age, and he's smiling, he's learning the banjo. So somehow through this, there was a huge amount of life force in this man, even at a young age. In any case, he gets through high school. He decides to matriculate at the University of Washington, having spent the senior year with his older brother, who's now married and living in Seattle. I know that I don't want to spend too much time on details, but and when he arrives at the University of Washington, in the first week, they have tryouts for the crew. And he, along with 170 other of his classmates, try out. And there are only going to be something like 18 or 16 positions in the final for the freshman crew. So the odds are 10 to 1. And they don't just let people go. Everybody has to compete and work like hell for 3 and 4 and 5 hours a day, even as freshmen where they're trying to get into college, if they want to make the crew. Well, Joe does manage to do it. He outlasts them. He perseveres, as he has already in his life. And then the story is how the development with his coach. He had a freshman coach, but the coach of the varsity and throughout is Al Ulbertson. And he, and then also George Pocock, who builds these shells for the whole country, but happens to be housed at the University of Washington. It's their story of what happens. And without going into a lot of detail, it turns out the freshman crew is fabulous. Their great nemesis is the University of California, whose coach, his name is Kai Elbright, and Mr. Elbright had actually been a member of the University of Washington's crew as an undergraduate, but has gone down, and he'd won the Olympics in 1928 with the University of California. So Washington really wanted to beat them every time they met, and the freshman boat did it very convincingly. Then he goes back, Joe goes back, as do his other crew members, to making money to try to survive. Remember, this is the Depression. This is 1933. And one of the wonderful things that this author does throughout the book is we get in very close what it's like to be Joe. He has to get home early to get sleep, etc., and you feel right there with him. But then the author pulls us back, and he talks about the Okies with the start of the Dust Bowl and the Depression and people going through it, and then even looks at Germany with their still the aftermath of the First World War, the hyperinflation which led to the conditions where Hitler could get in. And so we're constantly feeling almost an epic quality about the story, even though at other times we are very close into the characters. So in any case, the sophomore year is somewhat the same. The sophomore boat turns out to be remarkable with great times, and Joe is a full part of that, always, though, feeling the poorest member of the crew and living hand to mouth almost, trying to earn enough money. At about this time, Joe somehow living with the ambivalence of it all. His father and he somehow still have a relationship, and he helps his dad build a house. And I don't know, it's hard to understand quite from our modern view how these people made a go of it. But Joe stays in contact. He meets, I failed to mention, he meets a lady named Joyce back in Sequin when he's still in high school. And she has a emotionally not very there family, even though it's more together than Joe's. And they strike up a relationship and eventually get married. And throughout this, she is a strength behind him. They form a bond which gives him support throughout this whole thing. In the year between sophomore and junior year will be the year of the Olympics, 35-36, with the Olympics in the summer. Joe works on the Grand Coulee Dam to make money. He watches President Roosevelt, who's there, giving money, trying to be of some help to people with the Depression going on. And then we go back into the junior year. The crews are doing well, but the coach, Albertson, is constantly trying to find the right 8 guys to have together, plus the right cocks to have the very best crew. And And sometime in the middle of the year, he decides that Joe is so concerned about doing his part right, he somehow hasn't got enough awareness of the rest of the team. And he drops Joe from the first boat to the second boat and then to the third boat. And I think it suggested that's a very stressful time for him. And then on the 21st of March, Albertson decides, no, I'm missing something in that first boat. I need Joe. And he moves him back into the boat. And a little earlier, he moved a Cox from a different boat named Joe Mock. Or no, what's Mock's first name? Very, very smart guy. Bobby Mock, excuse me, who was the Cox, moves him into the boat, and he's a very canny guy. In any case, they race UC again now in juniors as the varsity boat. They beat them, and each year they then go east. They travel by train and go to Poughkeepsie, New York for sort of the nationals. And so it's the Western boats, UC and University of Washington, against the old money, the rich characters, including University of Pennsylvania and I suppose Harvard and Yale and the people with good crews. So it's a very fraught time. But in this year, it's a remarkable race because frequently the coach and their Cox's strategy is to keep Washington behind the leaders. So the early part of the race, the first mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, Washington tends to take a position a ways back. And in this race, they get 4 full boat lengths behind. And then in a magical last half a mile, they add the number of strokes. How fast you go is a function of the number of strokes you take and the power of each stroke. And so the Cox will tell guys, it reminds me a little of music because the number of strokes per minute, and like we have to memorize, I don't know, middle C perhaps. These guys have to know what 34 strokes a minute feels like enough to sort of effortlessly be able to move into it. It's quite wonderful. But in any case, they do win that race, and then they go on right from Poughkeepsie to Princeton, where the 6 finalist best colleges in the country meet, including University of Pennsylvania, to determine the one that will go to the Olympics to represent the U.S. And again, a very exciting race, and Washington comes from behind and beats University of Pennsylvania by 1 boat length. And the problem is then how to raise money. The Olympic Committee doesn't have enough money to send the kids over to Germany. And so the city of Seattle in 72 hours pulls it together. They've been listening on the radio, and again, we pull back and sort of, it's quite, anyway, and they raise enough money so the kids head out. They go on the boat Manhattan, and a couple of chapters is devoted to sort of the trip and then their experiences when they first get to Germany. And it's all good. Two things developed, though, while they're in Germany. One, I believe it was one of the teammates named Hume, gets really sick, and he's lost 15 pounds, and he's sick as hell to his stomach, and he can't keep anything down. But the coach doesn't feel he dares change, and so there's on-again, off-again feeling of how the hell are we going to manage to put our crew on the course. The other thing that develops is through either subterfuge or bad luck, the U.S. is given the 8th lane, which is the one that is affected by tides and the wind more than any of the other boats. And so the U.S. has by far the least desirable position to race in. So they've got a lot going against them. Hitler is there. They're trying to make a great show of it. They stopped persecuting the Jews in that one city where the race was being held temporarily. Before they left, Bobby Mock the Cox had been given a sealed envelope by his father. And he said, if you guys win in the East and are going to represent the U.S., I want you to open this envelope. he does, and it informs him that he is Jewish. He had never known that. And that his relatives live in Germany, and father wants him to visit his relatives while they're there. Mind-boggling. Anyway, the race is held against all odds. The U.S. ends up in a final sprint with Germany and Italy. Of the 8 boats, those 3, and they are neck and neck right through and the finish line. And it's anybody's guess, and the crowd's cheering because they think Germany's won, but the U.S. is won by literally just a breath. And it's, again, another aspect of this book that's so nice. Joe goes back and goes to sleep that night. His teammates do go out and celebrate. But this sort of today's world where it seems that an athlete that does well in the Olympics becomes a hero in TV and he signs million-dollar contracts to represent these guys, and then the rest of their lives, they just faded back into being part of all of us. And it was just so very nice, and that aspect of the book I really appreciated. They all go back to the U.S. They do have a chance. We follow each of them. They finish their college careers and go on to have, all of them, good lives. Joe lives to a very ripe old age, and the author, Mr. Brown, has a chance to interview him for the last 3 months of his life, which gives him so much detail. He talks to his daughter after that, so he's able to really get us into Joe's mind and what's going on with him. In any case, it was a fabulous book, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm going to call on all of you, but I wanted to at least mention 2 or 3 things before I sort of say what I bring to the book, because I think one of the nice things about books or any art is we bring ourselves to it, and so we each experience what we get out of it somewhat differently. But I first wanted to make sure you all realize this book is real history. It was absolutely exactly what happened. It reads entirely like a novel. I have never had a good writer it takes, but even, I've never read a book which was history, which was so, had me right there. I thought particularly this book was America. It was very easy for all of us, I think, in this country to relate. It wasn't hard to decipher or figure out in the sense of like a poem might be, or like an Irish writer who writes. We have to really think to figure out what he's trying to say. It's right out there where we can understand it. But it's complex because there's so many levels of things going on. I was reminded at times of maybe the Hudson River School of Painters, where they paint nature very huge and glorious and humans as very small. And I love that. And this book felt that way. As again, we get way out, looking at the world or the country and putting our individual action into context of what's going on. So it was very American in that way, a lot happening. In another way, we were looking at the winners. It was really the U.S. Cinderella story, at least for guys, starting with nothing and through your own perseverance, succeeding on the world stage amazingly. So there was that going on, but it hit me in a lot of ways. In any case, the cruelty, the sort of things we don't notice about all those other people that didn't go to the Olympics or win is something which it doesn't point out in a lot of detail, but it became, think of 170 kids that started out trying and spending hundreds of hours and couldn't make the crew, or all of those crews that worked just probably as hard as these guys did and didn't make it. So that our history, our country, our way of being has some wonderful highs, but it also produces a lot of stuff we don't talk so much about. So the story starts with deprivation, requires hard work, along with suffering and loss, but ends with remarkable perseverance paying off remarkably. I thought it very much told the story of individualism as opposed to teamwork or the whole. not only in the original one, I read that Pocock quote, that story, he talks about hitting the swing. And the swing is when everybody in that boat is totally in unison. And the sum of the parts is so much more than the sum. And it's almost magical because it's happening. But your brain isn't in it. You can work very hard, whether you're trying to hit a baseball, which was my sport, or row a boat. But at some point, when you're really doing it, you can't think it. It has to be memory of your muscles, I guess, and just the flow. You're just all together. And I think it expresses it and gives you a way of sort of appreciating that. I think the book is very much about passion of all sorts. And I was reminded of our talks that Natalie or Deanne or Sin talked about their passions. And this was a passion. In order to have the perseverance, the endurance, you had to want this a lot. Certainly that whole thing of democracy versus fascism, the rich versus the poor, the East versus the West, the book really plays that out. And again, it's something we all share in our histories. I thought it was interesting, too, that the book doesn't talk that much about money, unlike today. Yes, people needed enough to survive, but the motivations of people, of the coach, of the builder of the shell, of these guys, was not to get rich. They had a passion for what they were doing. Heroism, the ambiguity of Joe and his family and that relationship. By the way, in the end, Joyce and Joe marry, and the father's second wife, Thula, the musician, dies again, second wife he lost, but leaves 3 young children, and Joyce and Joe take over the parenting of those of his father's family. So they did have a tight family. I thought that ambiguity of what is the right way to raise a child. I mean, you look at what Joe went through and how it strengthened him. It worked. And then how we treat our young today, admirably, wanting to give them everything. And it works for a lot of people. And I'm glad we do, but not for everybody. So it's interesting to think how different. I thought, last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up. One is, I came to this very much, I was given the book by my oldest friend. Her name's Kay Denault. And she grew up where I spent my summers in Connecticut, and we knew each other since we were 4 years old. And she gave me the book on the way from her home, where she and her husband had moved to Seattle right out of their grad schools. And both were lawyers, and she argued a couple of cases in front of the Supreme Court, so she certainly had a great career. But she was going on this trip to put a medallion in the street in front of her father's family's house that was, taken away from them by the Nazis when they came to Vienna. And both parents were sent to Auschwitz and died there. And so it was very real to me, It really, and for Kay, this was a very important book and an important time. So that made the book particularly powerful for me. Also, having been a baseball player, that sort of teamwork versus individual. And I do know sometimes when you're 2 runs down in the 7th, unlike Wareham Gateman this year, if you have the right magic, you motivate each other, and it does affect, even in baseball, how you perform, and certainly in crew with the immediacy of it. It's huge. Lastly, I do hope some people who have watched the movie and not the book will speak. I think the visual arts have a different effect on us. In a way, we're a little more passive. You still, somebody else should talk about it, but the book gives us time to think and to reach and to deepen our understanding and to think about it in relationship to ourselves. And I find reading has become a passion in the last 3 or 4 years for me. I'd always enjoyed reading, but I had never sort of found it so helpful as I live my life and try to understand what the hell I'm doing here and stuff. Anyway, I wanted particularly to ask if Dodie would be willing to come and share a little of what she knows about her father's crewing experience.
My dad rowed for Penn a decade before the events described in The Boys in the Boat. My dad and mom were in college during the roaring 20s. They graduated college just before the crash of 29, at which point, in short order, they got married. My dad got an engineering job in Colorado on construction of what's now called Hoover Dam. My mom got a job teaching music at a school in D.C. where she would live with my dad's parents. They lived apart for, I think, the first 5 years of their marriage. Each was lucky to have a job. They were both supporting their parents, as both their fathers had been laid off. My dad was 40 when I was born. So by the time I heard about his rowing days, he was a pudgy, middle-aged college professor. He was still tall, but he did not look like the athlete he once was. But he would sometimes reminisce about the deprivations of training table and having to weigh in daily. Never about the joys of victory, though I know from the book that Penn won a couple of major regattas in the 20s, and Bill reminded me this morning that Penn was who Washington beat at that last runoff before the Olympics. And somewhere I still have Dad's pewter trophy plate with an 8-man boat engraved on it. I loved the book. I rooted for Washington all the way to beat the evil Ivy Leaguers who had life so much easier than they did and took Olympic gold.
I would love it if some of you guys would comment and give me, or give all of us, the benefit of your thoughts. Bye. Well, you can talk from here.
I had seen the movie before I read the book, and I don't like doing that because the movie is never nearly as good as the book. And then I saw the movie again after I read the book. And what I realized, what I found when I saw the movie again, was how much they zeroed in on the romance and missed a lot of the significance of the book. So if you've just seen the movie, I recommend heartily that you go to the book.
Other thoughts? Diane? Here it is.
I just wanted to say that this is a wonderful example of how history can be even more fascinating and wonderful and interesting. And I hate to hear people say, well, I don't read nonfiction, I only read fiction. But this beats any fictional book that I've ever read. And it really truly is an incredible book.
Brown has written several other books, one about people trying to getting to California, where a lot of people end up dying. Another one about the experience of Japanese Americans just before and during the Second World War. Both were good. I didn't find them quite as compelling as this, but they're still definitely worth a read. How about comments? Or Sandy?
I just wondered if you could identify as a Californian, when you say UC California, I assume you're talking about Berkeley?
University of California. I don't know. I guess it was Berkeley. Yeah.
As a UCLA person, we were closer to the water than they were, so.
Gil, maybe I knew you would watch the movie.
Oh, I did. For me, as I was watching it like you, I played all the sports and did fairly well. And but I grew up in a family of 13, and there wasn't any time that anybody could support me in any way at all. And so I recognized that his ability to get over hurdles and more hurdles. And every time I moved to different levels and achieved a lot of the goals, which I couldn't believe, is that I thought of that movie and don't let people put you down. And I remember when maybe in the middle of my life where they kept, in our small town, there were like people from like the poor side of town. And then there were people that, their families ran the communities. And for a long time, I was labeled kind of that. And so as I get to the middle level and then probably to the top, because I was active in everything. But as I thought of this character, I kept thinking all it took was internal spirit. I mean, I didn't let my environment dictate where I should go or not go. And then to even believe that I didn't belong. And it really, really helped me a lot in my life. So that's what I kind of got from that book.
Wow. It's lovely. Other thoughts? Well, I guess, Lois, sorry.
Hi. I really love the book too, and I agree with Vi. Movie, it's never the same. Movies are never the same because also because you can live in your head more with the book. You're being fed stuff in the movie, like that you may or may not interpret the book the same way. But one thing I thought about with not that this is exactly like that, but when you're, is it rowing? Is that what do they call it? Rowing?
Rowing,
Not
yeah.
sculling, right? Sculling something different. Rowing.
That's usually an individual,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So, but the whole point of unity, like when you're unified, and even I have to say, a couple jobs I've had, when you're in a real true team, when you're truly all aboard with the same passion, the same goals, you feel like you can work miracles. I mean, the energy is different. The energy just feeds off of everybody else, like you feel like you can accomplish anything, and maybe part of that is youth too. But when they're together, they're like one entity, when they talk about it. And that's where we can accomplish great things. And I try to apply that to today, where everything's so divided and it's so hard to feel like you have that. I think the country used to feel that energy maybe, but right now we don't. So we have to get that back somehow. But having something to aim for and strive for, having a goal that we're so passionate about together as a coalition or as a group, I mean, you can almost accomplish anything, I think, with that energy. So
I was reminded a little about our choir, strangely. When you think about it, the choir has to have timing. You have different parts, but you're all working to, you still have to say the same words, but you may be singing different notes. And they made a big point in the book about how each one of the rowers has a different role, even though they're all rowing. Sue.
I'm in the book group, love the book, also saw the movie. One of the things that disturbed me, just on a personal level, is why the United States could send the team there with Nazi Germany. In the movie, you see Hitler's group standing up there watching it and all that. That was kind of just disturbing with me, the political and that, And then the other thing is, my memory isn't real sharp on it, but I remember how hard they had to work off season and go out. Was he building the Hoover Dam, Joe? Yes.
Grand Coulee Dam.
Grand Coulee, yeah. I mean, just having to do that just to support himself so that he could go back and be part of the team again. Yeah.
It was that
Wonderful
constant
story,
struggle.
determination and resilience.
Mark.
I would echo what Sue just said. Just absolute grit. People being unwilling to give an inch in the determination to make it. Looking at people who just looked down on them as though they didn't matter at all, as though they were these bumpkins who couldn't possibly compete with these superior East Coasters or superior Germans and superior Europeans. And it was really just I've got the balls to do this and I'm going to do it, was the attitude of the Americans, and they did.
Yeah. One thing in the book, which was interesting, was just before the Olympics, Joe Louis, the best American boxer, did boxed against Max Schumer? Schmeling, right, and lost. The German beat him. So again, that was in the public mind at the time, so it just heightened it. Yes, Jeff.
I don't know quite why I kind of transferred over into a variation. We kind of talking sports throughout all this and about teams and blah, 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 and commitments to those kinds of things. And since I was sitting here looking at this building, and this building, most people, don't know how many of you realize that, this is not where this building was built. This building was originally built about 4 or 5 or 6 blocks away from here at ground level. Then after it was only, I don't know how old, maybe 8 or 10 years old or something or other. 2 years old. 2 years old, Mark reminds me. 2 years old, somebody gave this land, which was considered a much more visible location for it to be, and it would very much more play up the significant role of a Unitarian church in a community. And so they then chopped this building into at least 3 parts, loaded it up on wheels with oxen, dragged them down here, built this foundation, which is, 6 or 8 feet or 10 feet or whatever it is of stone up from the ground level, and lifted those sections up. At that point, sometime or other, the ladies of the church made special efforts and built the whole back of the building to have the organ added to the building at that point. So, there are incredible stories in all kinds of ways as we think about what goes on. And when the committee, the community works together, it's amazing what can happen, and has happened for this building.
Yes.
I built a sailboat once.
That would
I
take
was
a
in
lot.
a construction class in Duluth, and we divided into teams of 3, and the other guys and I built my sailboat and 2 speedboats for them. Now, it was a beautiful color blue, exactly what I wanted, and it was so heavy I could never use it. So it sat next to our house in this whatever my husband put it on, and it was beautiful, but it was useless because it was so heavy. I loved it, though.
When you were talking about how even though they won, they couldn't get to the Olympics unless the money got raised, all I was thinking about was how we as a church got together and raised the money to do the scaffolding and to do what we needed to do in this church, and that people work together when there is a goal that's really important to them. And I think we will do that in the future with all of the things that we need to do financially.
Passion is not dead in this church, that is for sure. Well, thank you all very much. I've enjoyed this, and I thought it would be a nice way to end it. And thanks to Bet for coming in, and for Dodie for being willing to lead us in singing the song Let It Be a Dance. Because in so many ways, being a part of a team, whether it's 2 people or 9, where you rise above the actual steps and are doing something in sync with each other, seem to be express very much a certain aspect of the book.